Tonight, we drift back to a time when the world moved a little differently, a time before the grand facades of banks graced our city streets, before the smooth click of a card made transactions effortless, before the quiet hum of servers stored our financial histories. We are journeying into an era where the concept of saving, this fundamental human impulse to secure one's future, manifested in ways that might seem charmingly anachronistic to us now, yet were immensely practical and deeply ingrained in the rhythms of daily life. As you settle in, perhaps adjusting your pillows just so, letting the gentle quiet of your surroundings embrace you, imagine a world where the very landscape of commerce was unwritten in the way we understand it today. There were no vaults of glittering gold guarded by silent, watchful eyes, no intricate ledgers precisely recording every deposit and withdrawal, no reassuring digital balance twinkling on a screen. Yet, the human desire to safeguard one's hard-earned resources, to prepare for a lean season or to invest in a brighter tomorrow, was as profound and enduring then as it is now. This wasn't a world without wealth, nor was it a world without foresight. It was simply a world where the mechanisms for preserving that wealth bloomed from the ingenious, often humble, practices of ordinary people. Tonight, we will gently explore these fascinating, sometimes forgotten, methods. We will look at the tangible items that held value, the communal bonds that offered a kind of financial security, the clever adaptations of nature and ingenuity that served as the silent cornerstones of personal economies. It is a story not of grand institutions, you see, but of individuals and families navigating their lives, making prudent choices, and finding remarkably diverse ways to ensure their prosperity, often against the backdrop of an uncertain world. So, let us begin this quiet exploration. Allow your thoughts to slowly unfurl, like a scroll revealing ancient wisdom, as we journey into a past where the very idea of a bank was still slumbering in the future, yet the essence of saving was vibrantly alive in every home, every community, every carefully considered decision. Just relax, dim your lights if you wish, and if you find solace in these stories, perhaps a gentle tap of the like button later, or even subscribing, would help others discover this quiet corner. For now, simply allow yourself to be carried away by the murmuring currents of history. We are stepping into a world where every glimmer of prosperity was cherished, and where the wisdom of ages guided the careful accumulation of treasures, tangible and intangible. We continue our gentle journey into the quiet hum of history, as we explore how people, long before the days of intricate financial systems, managed the everyday dance of their resources and needs. Tonight, we settle further into the past, into an era where the rhythms of life were intrinsically tied to the earth and the hands that worked it. We consider a time when the concepts of value and exchange were woven into the very fabric of community, built not on ledgers or coinage, but on something far more intimate, shared understanding and the quiet, enduring strength of human connection. Imagine, if you will, a small village nestled by a flowing river, centuries, perhaps millennia, ago. There are no bustling markets filled with coins clinking loudly, no ornate accounting houses with meticulously penned scrolls. Instead, life unfolds with a slower, more deliberate cadence. A hunter, perhaps, returns from a successful chase, his shoulders laden with the bounty he has secured. The meat, while nourishing, is far more than his immediate family could consume before it spoils in the warmth of the day. He does not concern himself with payment in the way we understand it now. His thoughts turn to his neighbor, the skilled potter whose clay vessels are essential for storing water and preserving grains. The hunter approaches the potter's dwelling, a silent understanding passing between them. He offers a portion of his fresh kill, perhaps a cut of deer, tender and rich. The potter, in turn, does not immediately offer a pot in direct exchange. Instead, he accepts the gift with a nod of gratitude, storing it carefully. This initial exchange is not a simultaneous, one-for-one transaction as we might conceive it. It is a deposit into an unspoken, yet deeply felt, communal account. The hunter has provided a resource, an act of generosity and foresight that will be remembered. A few days later, perhaps, the potter finds himself in need of new tools for his craft. His old flint scraper has become dull, or he requires a new piece of sturdy leather for his apron. He remembers the hunter, not just for the meat received, but for the inherent skill and resourcefulness he possesses. The potter approaches the hunter, not with a request for immediate payment for the venison, but with a request for assistance, or perhaps an offer to trade a finished pot for materials the hunter might have. The hunter, recall, received the meat, and now, without overt calculation, he understands the subtle balance. He might offer a newly sharpened piece of flint, or an offcut of sturdy hide. This was the essence of early bartering and resource management. It wasn't always a precise, immediate exchange. Often, it was guided by a profound reliance on memory, that quiet archive of past interactions stored within each mind. Who had shared their surplus berries when the harvest was lean? Who had helped mend a leaky roof after a storm? Who had offered their strength to clear a field, or their wisdom to heal a sickness? These acts of giving and receiving were meticulously, if unconsciously, catalogued. Trust was the invisible mortar that bound these exchanges. Without the complex legal frameworks we rely upon today, the promise of reciprocity, the expectation that a kindness would be returned in due course, was paramount. A person's reputation was their most valuable currency. To be known as generous, as reliable, as someone who honored their unspoken commitments, ensured continued access to the communal wealth of skills and goods. Conversely, to be seen as stingy or untrustworthy could mean isolation, a perilous state in communities where interdependence was not merely a preference, but a matter of survival. Consider the shared water source, a clear spring bubbling up from the earth, or the expansive hunting grounds, teeming with game. These were not privately owned in the way land is often conceived of today. They were communal resources, managed through custom and collective agreement. Decisions about when and where to hunt, or how much water to draw, were often made through consensus, guided by an intuitive understanding of sustainability and the long-term well-being of the group. If one individual took excessively, or damaged the shared resource, it affected everyone. The incentive to cooperate, to moderate one's own needs for the greater good, was powerfully immediate. The elders, with their vast reserves of lived experience and keen memories, often played a crucial role in these resource negotiations. They remembered past seasons of plenty and scarcity. They knew the rhythms of the land and the needs of each family. Their counsel helped to guide the community in its quiet, continuous endeavor to balance individual needs with collective sustainability. There was no market price for a deer or a basket of berries. Their value was understood in terms of their utility, their nourishment, and the labor required to acquire or create them. Even services were managed in this fluid, reciprocal manner. A skilled weaver might spend days crafting a warm cloak for a neighbor, knowing that when their own shelter needed repairs, the carpenter would likely offer their expertise without immediate expectation of payment in kind. The balance might not be struck that day, or even that month, but the gentle expectation of a future return simmered beneath the surface of their interactions. It was a subtle, continuous negotiation, often expressed through gestures, shared meals, and the quiet camaraderie of shared existence. These early systems, though seemingly simplistic to our modern eyes, were profoundly sophisticated in their ability to foster community, ensure survival, and allocate resources efficiently in the absence of formalized currency. They remind us that before the abstraction of money, value was rooted deeply in the tangible, in the hands that shaped the earth, the skills that rendered safety and sustenance, and the enduring bonds that wove individuals into the rich tapestry of a shared life. In this quiet, ancient world, the flow of goods and services was a continuous, almost breathing process, guided by the soft whisperings of memory and the steadfast embrace of trust. Tonight, we drift back to a time when wealth wore a very different face, when the true measure of a family's security was not found in glittering coins or precious metals, but in the simple, earthy bounty of their harvest. So, perhaps you might like to settle in, find your most comfortable spot, dim the lights just a little, and allow your thoughts to slow as we gently explore a world where the future was quite literally stored in the earth, and in sturdy structures crafted from wood and stone. If, by the end of our journey tonight, you find a quiet pleasure in these tales, a soft murmur of interest, then a gentle like or a quiet subscription would be a lovely gesture. We begin our exploration of stored wealth not with ledgers or strongboxes, but with the very essence of life itself, food. In the epochs before the advent of readily available coinage, before the intricate mechanisms of banking and credit took root, the most tangible form of accumulated value, the most vital expression of prosperity, lay in the surplus of the land. It was this careful accumulation of nourishment, this foresight in preserving the gifts of the earth, that truly separated survival from scarcity, abundance from outright desperation. For our distant ancestors, the turning of the seasons was not merely a picturesque spectacle, but a relentless, unwavering rhythm that dictated the very pulse of life. Summer brought the promise of growth, a verdant explosion of life, while autumn was a time of culmination, of gathering. But lurking beyond these periods of natural bounty lay the long, hushed vigil of winter, a season of stark beauty, certainly, but also one of profound challenge, when the earth slept beneath a blanket of frost and snow, and the sustenance it provided dwindled to a meager offering. It was during these lean, unforgiving months that diligent preparation truly bore its fruit, or rather, its grains and roots. Imagine, if you will, the humble grain. Wheat, barley, oats, and rye, these were not merely ingredients for a meal, but the very bedrock of existence. Each tiny, golden kernel represented a unit of concentrated energy, a spark of life held in waiting. A bountiful harvest, therefore, was a cause for deep, communal gratitude, yes, but also a formidable task of preservation. To simply leave grains exposed to the elements, or vulnerable to the gnawing insistence of rodents and insects, would be a tragic waste, a squandering of hard-won security. This imperative gave rise to the ingenious, yet wonderfully simple, architecture of the granary. These structures, found in countless variations across diverse cultures and continents, were often raised on staddle stones or sturdy posts. This elevated design served a crucial purpose, to deter rodents, preventing them from scrambling up the smooth, sometimes conical surfaces, and to allow for air circulation, which was absolutely vital in preventing the insidious creep of dampness and mold. Imagine the quiet, unassuming dignity of these buildings, often crafted with loving care from local timber or stone, their walls thick and insulating, their roofs steeply pitched to shed the rain. Inside these silent sentinels of sustenance, the dried grains would be carefully layered, perhaps on matting of woven reeds or rushes, creating an environment that was cool, dry, and dark. The smell within a well-tended granary would have been a profoundly reassuring one, a dry, earthy sweetness, a faint whisper of flour and sun-dried stalks. For the family who owned it, or for the community it served, the sight of a granary filled to the brim, reaching towards the rafters with its golden cargo, was a physical manifestation of their collective hope, their security for the days and months ahead. It was, in essence, their bank vault, its contents far more precious than any collection of shiny baubles. Alongside the vital grains, root vegetables played an equally crucial role in this ancient calculus of survival. Potatoes, turnips, carrots, parsnips, and beets, these sturdy underground treasures offered a different kind of bounty. Unlike grains, which could be milled into flour, root vegetables provided dense, fibrous nourishment, a slow-release fuel for the body, especially during the long, physically demanding winters. But these earthen delights presented their own set of preservation challenges. Vulnerable to rot if left in damp conditions, and to freezing if exposed to the biting cold, they required a specialized kind of storage. This is where the venerable root cellar entered the picture, a marvel of passive climate control, often dug directly into the earth itself. Imagine descending a few rough-hewn steps into the cool, dark embrace of a root cellar. The air here would be noticeably different from the outside world, a constant, earthy coolness, perpetually humid but not damp. These underground chambers, often lined with stone or brick, capitalized on the earth's natural insulating properties. The thick layer of soil above and around them protected the contents from the most extreme fluctuations in temperature, keeping the temperature just above freezing. A sweet spot that inhibited spoilage without damaging the delicate cellular structure of the vegetables. Within this subterranean sanctuary, you would find the produce meticulously arranged. Potatoes might be stored in bins or barrels, perhaps insulated with layers of straw or sawdust to prevent bruising and to maintain an even temperature. Carrots and parsnips might be bedded in moist sand or peat, their earthy coats helping to retain their natural moisture and prevent them from shriveling. Apples, too, often found a home here, carefully separated to prevent one spoiled fruit from contaminating another, their gentle, sweet aroma mingling with the deeper, more profound scent of damp earth and growing things. The experience of entering a root cellar was a sensory journey. The soft, diffuse light filtering in from the entrance, or perhaps the gentle glow of a lantern, would illuminate shelves laden with jars of preserves, hanging braided onions, and baskets overflowing with the earthy treasures of the garden. Each jar, each bulb, each root represented not just food, but hours of labor, the careful tending of soil, the patient waiting, and the diligent work of harvest and preparation. It was a testament to human ingenuity and foresight, a quiet celebration of self-reliance. These granaries and root cellars were more than mere storage spaces. They were the very heart of economic stability for households and communities. They were assurance policies written in wheat and potatoes, a tangible declaration against the harsh realities of want. The larger and fuller your granary, the more expansive and well-stocked your cellar, the greater your confidence in weathering the storms of life. The act of storing, of preserving, was a fundamental expression of wealth. It allowed families to bridge the gap between harvest and hunger, to protect themselves from the vagaries of climate and the unpredictability of nature. A surplus of stored food might even allow for trade, exchanged for tools, cloth, or other necessities, thus forming the foundational currency of early economies. So, as we bring our thoughts gently back from these quiet, purposeful spaces, consider the sheer weight of meaning held within these humble structures. The granary, standing tall and proud, and the root cellar, a hidden bastion beneath the earth, were not just places to keep things. They were monuments to human resilience, to the profound wisdom of planning, and to the deep, abiding understanding that true wealth, in its most essential form, is the capacity to sustain life itself. They remind us, with quiet power, that before our intricate financial systems, the foundations of security were laid, quite literally, one grain, one root at a time, echoing through the soft hum of history, a quiet testament to patience and forethought. Tonight, we drift back to a time before the widespread establishment of banks, a period when the very notion of safeguarding one's hard-earned resources took on forms quite different from those we know today. Allow your thoughts to settle, your breathing to deepen, and your muscles to release any lingering tension. As we explore the gentle history of how our ancestors managed their wealth, you might find it soothing to dim the lights, perhaps even to wrap yourself in a soft blanket. And if, by the end of our journey, you find a sense of peace, a quiet warmth emanating from these historical whispers, then perhaps a gentle like or even a soft subscribe would be a kind gesture. As civilizations continued their slow, deliberate development, a discernible shift occurred in the manner in which people chose to preserve their accumulated value. There was a burgeoning recognition of certain items, possessing qualities that transcended mere functionality, evolving into something intrinsically treasured, something holding a steadfast worth. These were not the perishable goods of daily life, nor even the sturdy tools of agriculture, but rather objects characterized by their inherent durability and their quiet portability. We speak now of the era when crafted jewelry and raw, unblemished precious metals began their emergence as singularly valued assets, weaving themselves into the very fabric of early economic life. Imagine, if you will, the slow, deliberate process of a society maturing, growing beyond the immediate concerns of survival to embrace a more nuanced understanding of wealth. In this evolution, the practicalities of storage and movement became paramount considerations for those seeking to safeguard their resources. A bulky harvest, though immensely valuable, was neither easily concealed nor readily transported should circumstances demand a swift departure. Livestock, while a living, breathing form of wealth, required constant care and was subject to disease or theft. But then, a new class of item began to assert its enduring appeal, the small, the beautiful, the surprisingly dense. Consider the gentle gleam of gold, unearthed from riverbeds or painstakingly chipped from rock. Or the cool, silvery sheen of refined silver, painstakingly separated from its ore. These were substances that did not rust, did not decay, and were not easily destroyed by fire or flood. Their very physical properties, their resistance to the ravages of time, their remarkable malleability, allowing them to be shaped and refined, lent them an inherent preciousness that people instinctively understood. A small nugget of gold, perhaps no larger than a thumbnail, could represent many hours, even days, of labor. It was a concentrated form of value, a tangible representation of effort and resourcefulness. Beyond the raw ingots and unworked nuggets, there was the additional layer of human artistry, imbuing these precious materials with an elevated significance. Jewelers, often master craftspeople with skills passed down through generations, would transform these raw metals into objects of exquisite beauty. A finely wrought necklace, an intricately carved brooch, or a set of rings designed with delicate motifs, these were not merely ornaments. They were also, fundamentally, portable banks. Each curve, each polished surface, each gemstone carefully set, added to the perceived and actual value of the piece. Think of the practical elegance of such a choice. A substantial collection of bronze arrowheads, while useful, would be cumbersome to carry if one needed to flee or relocate. But a series of interconnected gold rings, strung together or worn discreetly, represented an equivalent, if not greater, store of value, easily carried concealed beneath clothing. These items served a dual purpose, functioning both as adornment, signifying status and often spiritual beliefs, and as a readily convertible form of wealth. In times of need, a piece of jewelry could often be exchanged for food, for passage, or for safety. The intrinsic appeal of these precious metals lay in their consistent rarity. Unlike clay, stone, or even bronze, gold and silver were not universally abundant. Their limited supply meant that they held their value across different regions and even different societies. A gold bangle crafted in one distant land would likely be recognized and valued in another, making it an early form of international currency, a silent language of worth understood across cultural divides. This universality was a profound advantage in a world without standardized monetary systems, providing a reliable hedge against unforeseen circumstances. Moreover, jewelry and precious metals offered a certain degree of security that other forms of wealth did not. While a large store of grain or textiles might attract unwanted attention and be difficult to hide effectively, a few ounces of gold or a handful of valuable jewels could be secreted away with relative ease. They could be buried within the earth, tucked into a hidden compartment within a dwelling, or sewn into the lining of clothing. The very discretion they offered contributed to their appeal as a method of saving and protecting one's future. Imagine a family in ancient Mesopotamia, perhaps, carefully guarding a small chest containing polished carnelian beads, intricately worked silver bracelets, and a few small ingots of gold. This treasure chest, perhaps stored beneath the hearth or buried in a clay pot within the walls of their home, represented not just saved wealth, but also insurance against famine, against invasion, against the unpredictable vagaries of life. It was a tangible connection to their security, a testament to their foresight and their desire to provide for their descendants. The craftsmanship involved in creating these pieces also added to their enduring value. A skillfully executed piece of jewelry was a testament not only to the material it contained but also to the human ingenuity and artistic talent that shaped it. Such pieces were often passed down through generations, becoming family heirlooms. Each time they were worn, they subtly broadcast a family's standing, their history, and their accumulated prosperity. But even when not on display, tucked away for safekeeping, their value remained, silently enduring. The quiet weight of a silver armband, the subtle shimmer of a gold pendant, these were more than just beautiful objects. They were investments, meticulously stored, carefully protected, representing the accumulated labor and careful planning of generations. They were the original long-term savings plans, providing a sense of stability and reassurance in a world that was often much less predictable and secure than our own. And so, the soft gleam of metal, the vibrant hue of a gemstone, became the silent guardians of personal wealth, patiently awaiting the moment they would be called upon to provide for future needs. Rest gently now, as these quiet thoughts settle within you. As the soft whispers of time continue to guide us through these serene landscapes of the past, we arrive now at a somewhat practical, yet deeply ingrained aspect of pre-banking life, the intricate art of concealment. We have spoken of the ways people created wealth, of their reasons for storing it, and now, we shall explore the very physical act of hiding it. In an age devoid of steel vaults, of government-insured deposits, the sanctity of one's valuables rested entirely upon the ingenuity of the homeowner, a silent, solitary guardian of their own hard-earned prosperity. Imagine, if you will, a tranquil evening, the hearth fire casting dancing shadows upon the uneven timber walls of a humble cottage, or perhaps the cool, smooth stone of a more substantial manor house. The day's labors are done, the sounds of the bustling village or the rustling fields have receded, and within this quiet domestic sphere, thoughts turn to the safekeeping of precious items. Not merely the glint of coin, or the shimmer of a piece of jewelry, but often, the very continuation of one's family, one's livelihood, depended upon the secure concealment of these items. This was not a task for the faint of heart, nor for the unobservant eye, but a deeply personal, often intuitive process, passed down perhaps through generations, or perhaps discovered anew with each necessity. One of the most immediate and, in many ways, most vulnerable places for concealment was within the very fabric of the home itself. Walls, for instance, offered surprising possibilities. Consider the wattle and daub constructions, where woven branches, plastered with mud and straw, could be subtly disturbed, a small section removed, a pouch of coin or a valuable manuscript slipped into the hollow space between the inner and outer layers, and then meticulously replaced, the new patch of daub feathered in to blend seamlessly with the old. The plaster and lath walls of later centuries presented similar opportunities, small panels carefully cut and resecured, perhaps behind a heavy piece of furniture that would rarely be moved. Even in substantial stone houses, a loose stone could be identified, removed with a practiced hand, revealing a cool, dry cavity perfect for housing a small, leather-bound box. These were not grand safes, but intimate, almost organic hiding places, known only to the family, perhaps even only to the head of the household. The floors, too, held their secrets. Beneath loose flagstones in the kitchen or pantry, where daily foot traffic might obscure any minute irregularities, a small cavity could be dug, lined perhaps with clay or a robust cloth, and then covered once more, the stone replaced with care, perhaps sealed with a thin layer of earth or ash to further mask its disturbance. Wooden floorboards, particularly in upper stories or less frequently accessed rooms, also provided discreet possibilities. A floorboard, perhaps slightly shorter than its neighbors, or one that had a peculiar knot or grain pattern, might be the chosen one. It could be carefully prized up, its edges worn smooth by repeated, gentle manipulation, revealing a narrow space beneath the joists. Here, a flat pouch of coins, a rolled document, or perhaps a small, valuable trinket could be placed, out of sight, out of immediate reach. The weight of heavy furniture strategically placed over such a spot would offer an additional layer of protection, both physically and visually. Beyond the structural elements of the home, personal belongings themselves became ingenious caches. Consider a sturdy wooden chest, not merely for clothes, but one with a false bottom, expertly crafted to appear solid, yet concealing a secret compartment beneath. The bottom panel might slide out on hidden grooves, or a specific sequence of pressures on its sides might release a spring-loaded latch. Such craftsmanship required skill, often provided by a local carpenter sworn to secrecy, or perhaps even fashioned by the homeowner themselves if they possessed the necessary talents. Books, too, especially larger volumes kept for display, could be hollowed out, their pages meticulously cut to form a cavity where small, precious items could nestle, their presence utterly undetectable to the casual observer. The Bible, often the largest and most revered book in a household, frequently served this dual purpose, a source of spiritual comfort and a silent guardian of earthly treasures. Even the everyday items of a household, unassuming and prosaic, could be adapted for concealment. The hollow leg of a heavy wooden table, sealed with a removable wooden plug. The space inside a large, decorative ceramic vase, covered by an arrangement of dried flowers. The cavity behind a loose brick in the fireplace, a place almost too obvious, and therefore, paradoxically, often overlooked. These hiding spots were chosen for their apparent ordinariness, their ability to blend in with the mundane background of daily life, offering protection not through strength, but through invisibility. The act of hiding these valuables was often performed with a quiet ritualistic intensity. It was an act of profound trust, both in the chosen spot and in the discretion of family members. It was a silent testament to the value placed on these objects, not just for their material worth, but for what they represented: security, lineage, future opportunity. And in this slow, deliberate act of concealment, in the quiet placement of a coin pouch into a wall cavity, or a precious jewel box beneath a floorboard, there was a deep sense of autonomy, a quiet rebellion against the unpredictable nature of the world outside. These homes, therefore, were not merely shelters from the elements, but intricate labyrinths of discretion, where wealth was not only accumulated, but guarded with a quiet, yet profound, ingenuity. And in the very intimacy of these hidden places, we find another gentle thread woven into the tapestry of human history, a testament to resilience and resourcefulness in simpler, yet often more challenging, times. And so, as we continue our gentle journey into the quiet ways of the past, let us turn our gaze from the diligent individual, carefully guarding their small store, to the broader canvas of community. Imagine, if you will, the soft hum of village life, where the threads of individual destinies were woven together into a stronger, more resilient fabric. Beyond the solitary hearth, where each family cherished its own modest provisions, there was often a larger, communal breath held in reserve, a collective storehouse against the fickle hand of fate. Picture a village, nestled perhaps by a winding river, or perched upon a gentle rise, its homes gathered close like a family of birds at dusk. Within this close-knit world, the understanding of shared vulnerability ran deep, a quiet knowing forged by seasons of unpredictable harvest and sudden scarcity. It was this shared understanding that often gave rise to a beautiful, understated system of communal hoarding, a pooling of resources that spoke not of individual wealth, but of collective survival. This was not about personal profit, nor the accumulation of riches, but rather the safeguarding of the very lifeblood of the community itself. Consider the grain, that most fundamental of sustenance. While each household would meticulously fill its own granary, a village might also maintain a common store, a granary of a larger scale, perhaps a robust structure built with shared hands and sturdy timber, its deep interior cool and dry. Into this common repository, a small portion of each family's successful harvest might be contributed, not as a tax, but as an investment in a shared future. It was a recognition that even the most bountiful individual harvest could be overshadowed by a widespread blight, and that in such times, the community's strength lay in its ability to draw upon a collective well. These communal reserves were not simply places of storage, they were symbols of solidarity. Imagine the careful hands, young and old, working together during the harvest, separating a portion of the golden wheat or the plump rice, carrying it with steady steps to the village granary. Feel the warmth of the sun on their backs, hear the gentle rustle of the grain as it pours into the communal coffers, a sound imbued with quiet hope. This act of contribution was a silent promise, an unspoken agreement that no one would be left to face hunger alone, that the lean times would be met with shared resolve. Such collective stores extended beyond mere food. In some communities, particularly those facing harsh winters, a shared woodpile might be maintained, a vast stack of split timber, seasoned and ready. Each family, having gathered their own supply, might also contribute a portion to this common reserve, understanding that a sudden, severe snap of cold could threaten the most vulnerable amongst them. Picture the crisp autumn air, the rhythmic thud of axes, the sweet scent of freshly cut wood, all contributing to this shared warmth, this collective shelter against the biting chill. And then there were the tools, the implements essential for daily life and livelihood. While some tools, like a farmer's hoe or a weaver's shuttle, were personal possessions, more specialized or expensive equipment might be held in common. A sturdy plow, perhaps, or a large grinding stone, too costly for every household to own, would be cared for by the community, available for all to use as needed. This shared ownership fostered a sense of interdependency, a gentle dance of borrowing and lending, where the care of the common tools became a shared responsibility, a quiet testament to the idea that together, they were stronger and better equipped. These communal reserves were managed with a quiet diligence, often by elders or trusted individuals within the village, chosen for their wisdom and fairness. There would be a gentle accounting, not of debits and credits in a ledger, but a mindful tracking of what was brought in and what was carefully distributed during times of need. The rules for drawing upon these reserves would be understood through custom and tradition, passed down through generations, ensuring that the system remained equitable and sustained. There might be specific criteria: those who had suffered a devastating crop failure, or families facing an unusual hardship, ensuring that the aid was directed where it was most acutely needed, not squandered. Consider the profound psychological comfort these communal stores offered. In a world where uncertainty was a constant companion, where the very act of survival often felt precarious, the presence of these shared resources provided a deep well of security. It was a tangible expression of the idea that they were all in this together, that the community itself was a living, breathing safety net. When individual provisions ran low, the thought of the village granary, or the communal woodpile, would cast a soft glow of reassurance, warding off the darkest fears. This proactive approach to collective well-being also nurtured a profound sense of belonging. The act of contributing to the common reserve, of knowing that one's own efforts were bolstering the strength of the entire community, created a powerful bond. It was a shared endeavor, a joint investment in resilience. Imagine the subtle pride felt by a farmer as they carry their share of grain to the communal store, their small contribution becoming a vital part of a much larger whole, their individual effort magnified by the collective. So, as the natural rhythm of seasons unfolded, from the toil of planting to the celebration of harvest, these villages wove together a quiet fabric of interdependence. The communal reserves were more than just provisions, they were anchors in a world of flux, tangible expressions of empathy, and powerful demonstrations of how ordinary people, long before the advent of formal banking institutions, understood the profound strength that lay in pooling their resources, in caring for one another, and in creating a collective buffer against the unforeseen challenges of life. It was a system built not on ledgers and interest rates, but on trust, mutual aid, and an intuitive understanding of the shared human condition. A truly magnificent and deeply comforting thought to hold in our minds as we gently drift. Tonight, as the world outside softens into the quiet hues of evening, we drift back to a time when the echoes of ancient ingenuity still resonated throughout daily life. Let the gentle cadence of my voice be a soft current to carry you through these forgotten pathways of history. Dim the lights if you wish, find a comfortable posture, and simply allow these thoughts to unfold around you. Should you find a quiet peace in this journey, a soft like or subscribe would be a gentle signal of your appreciation for these tranquil wanderings through the past. We have explored many forms of accumulated value, from sturdy grains secreted away in earthenware to the patient nurturing of livestock, each representing a quiet triumph over uncertainty. But now, we arrive at a pivotal moment, a turn in the human story where the very nature of saving, and indeed of wealth itself, began to undergo a profound transformation. This was the era when the glimmer of precious metals, once merely beautiful adornments, began to assume a new, powerful significance, the birth and widespread adoption of standardized coinage. Imagine, if you will, the world as it was. Transactions were often complex, a careful dance of bartering, wherein a farmer might offer bushels of wheat for a weaver's cloth, or a potter exchange his finest amphras for a shepherd's wool. Each exchange required agreement on value, often a time-consuming negotiation, and the physical lugging of goods. Storing such diverse forms of wealth was similarly cumbersome, requiring barns for grain, pastures for animals, or secure spaces for tools and textiles. The concept of a universal, easily transferable unit of value was largely absent, leaving many to rely on the tangible, but often unwieldy, assets they produced or acquired. Then, a quiet revolution began to unfurl, often attributed to the ancient Anatolian kingdom of Lydia in the 7th century BCE, though similar innovations likely arose independently in various corners of the globe. This revolution was not one of swords and empires, but of metallurgy and meticulous measurement. It involved the shaping of precious metals, primarily electrum, a natural alloy of gold and silver, and later, pure gold and silver, into small, uniform discs. Each disc was then carefully stamped with an official mark, a symbol of authority guaranteeing its weight and purity. This mark was not merely decorative, it was a promise, a decree from a governing power that this small, shining object truly held the value it purported to possess. Consider the implications of this simple act. Suddenly, the inherent difficulties of bartering began to recede. No longer did one need to haggle over the quality of a sheep or the precise quantity of olive oil needed to equal a certain amount of iron. Instead, these small metal discs, each bearing its authoritative symbol, offered a readily understood and universally accepted medium of exchange. A single coin could represent a day's labor, a measure of grain, or a small piece of craftsmanship. This was a profound shift, simplifying transactions and accelerating the pace of commerce in ways previously unimaginable. But beyond the mere ease of trade, coinage introduced an entirely new dimension to the act of saving. Let us recall the challenges of accumulating wealth in earlier forms. Storing excess grain carried the risk of spoilage, infestation, or theft. Livestock required continuous care, pasture, and were vulnerable to disease or predation. Real estate, while valuable, was inherently illiquid, difficult to convert quickly into other goods or services. However, coins, by their very nature, overcame many of these obstacles. They were, first and foremost, remarkably portable. A merchant traveling between cities could carry his accumulated wealth not in heavy sacks of produce or a flock of animals, but in a small pouch, secreted away on his person. This portability reduced the risk of loss or theft in transit, and allowed for greater mobility and flexibility in economic activity. Imagine the freedom this afforded, the ease with which one could move capital, pursue new ventures, or simply escape danger, taking one's financial security along. Secondly, coinage was inherently divisible. Unlike a large piece of silver or an entire sack of grain, coins came in various denominations, allowing for purchases and savings of varying scales. One could save small amounts, coin by coin, without needing to acquire an entire valuable item. This allowed even those with modest means to accumulate wealth in a way that was accessible and incremental. A casual laborer, for instance, might receive a small coin for a day's work and gradually, patiently, set aside several such coins until he had enough to purchase a tool, a piece of cloth, or a treat for his family. This gradual accumulation fostered a greater sense of financial independence and planning among a wider segment of the population. Thirdly, and perhaps most importantly for the concept of saving, coinage represented a concentrated form of stored value. A small, unassuming gold coin held far more value in its compact form than an equivalent measure of most other commodities. This meant that wealth could be accumulated in a far less space-intensive manner. Instead of needing expansive larders or numerous livestock, one could keep their savings in a small chest, perhaps buried beneath the hearth, or tucked away in a secure cavity within a wall. This discreetness offered a new level of security for personal savings, making it less conspicuous to potential thieves or envious neighbors. The act of saving, therefore, took on a new character. It became less about the physical maintenance of perishable goods and more about the careful collection and safeguarding of these small, metallic embodiments of value. People began to think in terms of units of currency, mentally converting their labor or their produce into potential piles of coins. This mental accounting, this abstract representation of wealth, was a profound cognitive shift, laying the groundwork for complex economic thought. Merchants, artisans, and farmers alike found a new peace of mind, a subtle security in the clinking weight of their small hoards of coins. They were not merely storing metal, they were storing potential, storing the fruits of their labor in a form that was less prone to decay, simpler to manage, and easier to deploy when the need arose. The silver drachma, the gold stater, the bronze assarian, each was a silent promise of future sustenance, a tangible reassurance in an unpredictable world. This wasn't simply a matter of convenience, it was a fundamental shift in economic behavior. Coinage facilitated the emergence of markets that transcended local boundaries, allowing for broader trade networks and greater specialization of labor. If a potter in one region could easily exchange his wares for standardized coins, he could then use those coins to purchase rare pigments or finer clay from distant lands, without the logistical nightmare of bartering directly with another artisan miles away. This economic interconnectedness provided new opportunities for accumulating wealth and, consequently, new avenues for saving it. For the ordinary person, the arrival of coins offered a subtle empowerment. It meant that a lifetime of diligent work could be compressed into a manageable, portable form, accessible when times were hard or when a significant purchase was desired. A parent could carefully set aside a few coins each month, gradually building a dowry for a daughter, or accumulating enough to pass on a small inheritance to their children. These small acts of saving, empowered by the humble coin, became the bedrock of financial planning and familial security long before the concept of a bank vault ever entered human imagination. Thus, the quiet clink of metal against metal, the subtle gleam of a standardized coin, marked not just a technological advancement, but a profound evolution in how humans understood, managed, and quietly preserved their hard-earned prosperity. It was a tangible step towards a future where wealth was not merely present, but portable, divisible, and most importantly, capable of being thoughtfully and securely accumulated. Tonight, as the gentle quietness of the evening settles around us, we drift back to a time when the world moved a little slower, when communities were woven together by threads of necessity and interconnectedness. Pull your most comfortable blanket a little closer, perhaps dim the lights in your room, and simply allow your mind to drift. If, by the end of our journey tonight, you find a gentle peace, feel free to like or subscribe to our channel. Your kind support allows us to continue crafting these quiet journeys into the past. Now, let us continue our quiet exploration of a time before the widespread establishment of banks, a time when the rhythm of life in a small village or a close-knit hamlet dictated the very mechanisms of resource management. As we've gently traversed through the quiet fields of trade and bartering, and the subtle art of safeguarding one's meager treasures, our journey brings us now to a most human and endearing aspect of these early communities, the quiet, unspoken understanding of lending and borrowing amongst neighbors. Imagine, if you will, a small, sleepy village nestled softly beside a slow-moving river, perhaps in the verdant heart of an ancient forest, or on the gentle slopes of rolling hills, touched by the long shadows of a setting sun. In such a place, where the horizon defined the very edge of one's known world, and the faces one saw each day were often the same, a deep, pervasive sense of trust quite naturally blossomed. This trust was not merely a pleasant sentiment, it was, in fact, the very bedrock upon which the informal economies of these communities were carefully constructed. Here, the notion of informal networks of trust was not an abstract concept discussed in busy market squares or whispered in darkened taverns. It was a lived reality, as palpable and comforting as the warmth of a neighbor's hearth on a chilly evening. These networks were intricately woven into the very fabric of daily life, forming an invisible yet profoundly strong web that connected each household, each family, to the others. It was in these quiet interstices that the gentle acts of lending and borrowing truly thrived, allowing a quiet flow of resources that prevented hardship from blossoming into true destitution. Consider a simple, everyday scenario that might have unfolded many, many times in such a village. Picture old Alara, her hands weathered by years of tilling the stubborn soil, finds herself in a predicament. Her cherished, sturdy spade, a tool she inherited from her own mother, has unexpectedly snapped at the haft. The spring planting season is upon them, and the earth waits patiently, yet unforgivingly. In a world without hardware stores or ready cash for new implements, this broken spade represents not just an inconvenience, but a genuine threat to her family's meager harvest. Elara would not, in such a circumstance, fall prey to despair. Instead, guided by the quiet wisdom of her community, she would simply walk the short, familiar path to her neighbor, Jorn's humble abode. Jorn, she knew, possessed a spare spade, perhaps one he himself had mended long ago, or a sturdy hand-me-down from his own father. There would be no formal contracts drawn up, no anxious bargaining, no talk of interest rates or repayment schedules in gold or silver. Instead, Elara would simply state her need, perhaps with a soft sigh of regret over her unfortunate accident, and Jorn, without a moment's hesitation, would fetch his spare spade from its quiet corner, its worn wooden handle fitting comfortably into his steady grip. He might offer it to her with a quiet nod, perhaps a murmured word of encouragement about the good earth, or a gentle reminder to return it when her planting was done, or perhaps simply when he found himself in need of its particular strength. This unspoken agreement, born of shared experiences and mutual respect, was the very essence of lending goods in this early world. It was a transaction built not on ledger books, but on the enduring strength of human relationship. The spirit of lending extended far beyond mere tools, encompassing a rich tapestry of needs and provisions. Imagine a family, perhaps new parents, their young infant suddenly taken ill with a fever, and their small supply of dried willow bark, a traditional remedy, unexpectedly diminished. They might approach the elder healer, or a more experienced mother in the village, not with money, but with a plea for a small measure of the precious herb. The lender, understanding the urgency and the quiet fear in their eyes, would undoubtedly part with a portion of their own stock, comforted by the unspoken understanding that should their own family face a similar plight, the favor would, without question, be gently returned. It was a system flowing with quiet reciprocity, a balm against the sharp edges of misfortune. And it was not only goods that moved through these delicate networks. The lending of labor was equally, if not more, vital for the very survival of these communities. Picture the seasons turning, the urgency of harvest time when the wheat stood tall and golden, promising sustenance for the long winter ahead. A single family, even a robust one, might struggle to bring in an entire field before an unexpected autumn storm arrived, threatening to flatten their entire year's efforts. In such a moment of shared anxiety, a small miracle would unfold. Neighbors, seeing the burgeoning field and the gathering clouds, would simply arrive, perhaps with their own scythes slung over their shoulders, their hands ready for the rhythmic swing and the arduous stoop. There would be no expectation of immediate monetary payment, no tallying of hours or rates per sheaf. This was a contribution of spirit, of collective effort, a communal undertaking. Each helping hand was a silent promise, a promise that when their own field ripened, or when a barn needed mending, or a roof required rethatching, those same helping hands, and many more, would appear, ready to share the burden. This quiet exchange of physical effort formed the very backbone of communal resilience. The repayment in these instances was rarely, if ever, in the cold, impersonal clink of coins. It was a far more elegant and human system. Repayment was almost always in kind. If Alara borrowed Jorn's spade, she might return it polished and sharper than before, or perhaps deliver a small basket of her first, tender peas from the very patch she cultivated with it, a tangible expression of gratitude and fulfilling the unspoken bond. If a family borrowed precious medicinal herbs, they might, weeks later, share a particularly fine cut of meat from a successful hunt, or offer their strong hands for a taxing household chore, gently balancing the scales of obligation. This subtle choreography of giving and receiving was an act of quiet elegance, utterly devoid of the often harsh calculations of modern financial systems. There was a gentle fluidity to these transactions, an understanding that the immediate return might not always be precisely equivalent in material value, but that the overall balance of favors and kindnesses within the community would, over time, always maintain a harmonious equilibrium. There was no interest charged in the traditional sense, no percentage added for the privilege of a loan. The interest, if one were to call it that, was woven into the very fabric of the continued goodwill, the sustained trust, and the enduring strength of the community itself. To maintain one's standing, to remain a respected and reliable member of the silent pact, was the greatest incentive for prompt and thoughtful repayment. These informal networks, therefore, were not merely quaint anecdotes from a bygone era. They were ingenious, deeply human solutions to very real economic challenges, operating entirely without the complex institutions we associate with finance today. They demonstrated how, when faced with scarcity and uncertainty, human beings naturally gravitated towards cooperation, building systems of mutual support that were as robust and enduring as the communal spirit they embodied. In the gentle hum of these interactions, we can discern the quiet wisdom of a world that understood the profound value of looking out for one another, a world where the greatest wealth often lay not in one's personal hoard, but in the strength of one's connections to their neighbors. And it is within these tranquil reflections that we will allow our minds to gently rest tonight. Tonight, we prepare ourselves for a tranquil journey back through time, to an era before the ubiquitous presence of the modern banking institution, a time when the threads of communal life were woven with different patterns of trust and preservation. As you settle into your softest cushions, perhaps dimming the lights to a soothing glow, allow your mind to gently unfurl, ready to absorb the quiet rhythms of history. If, by the end of our shared exploration, you find a gentle peace, please consider offering a small gesture of appreciation by liking and subscribing, allowing these stories to continue their gentle drift into the night. We have wandered through fields of buried pots and pondered the wisdom of communal solidarity, and now, our historical current carries us toward an institution whose steadfast presence often predates even the earliest glimmerings of formal commerce, the temple. Imagine, if you will, the slow, deliberate construction of these sacred spaces, stones carefully placed, wood meticulously carved, rising as beacons of faith and community in a world often fraught with uncertainty. These structures, dedicated to the divine, were not merely places of worship and spiritual communion, but often, by their very nature, became centers of profound terrestrial significance, evolving to fulfill roles that, in our modern world, we might attribute to a bank or a secure vault. The sanctity imbued within these holy places was deeply palpable, a powerful aura understood and respected by all within the community. It was this inherent sacredness that offered an unparalleled layer of protection, a silent, powerful guardian of anything placed within their hallowed walls. The very notion of profaning a temple, of violating its sacred trust, carried with it such profound spiritual and societal repercussions that it served as an incredibly potent deterrent against theft or intrusion. For those living in these earlier times, the fear of divine retribution, of offending the gods or spirits to whom the temple was dedicated, often far outweighed any earthly desire for gain. This unspoken understanding created an environment of security that no mere lock or guard could truly replicate. Consider the diverse array of valuables that might have found their temporary home within the temple's embrace. Precious metals, painstakingly extracted from the earth and carefully fashioned into ornaments or ingots, might have been brought for safeguarding. Grains, harvested with strenuous effort and representing the very sustenance of the community, could have been stored in temple granaries, not only for ceremonial purposes but also as reserves for leaner times, their safety ensured by divine oversight. Even important documents, perhaps treaties between tribes or records of significant family lineages, might have been entrusted to the temple scribes or priests for their impartial and unassailable preservation. The temple became a repository not just of spiritual wealth, but often of the very material fabric that sustained daily life and held society together. The individuals who oversaw these sacred institutions, the priests and priestesses, the spiritual leaders, were often regarded with immense respect and held positions of significant authority within their societies. Their lives were often dedicated to purity and service, their judgments considered wise and their intentions benevolent. This respect, this profound trust vested in their moral compass, naturally extended to their role as custodians of communal and individual assets. To entrust one's valuables to the temple leadership was to place them in the hands of those believed to be beyond reproach, guided by higher principles, and accountable to the divine. Their integrity was not merely a personal virtue, but a fundamental pillar of the temple's enduring power and utility. Imagine a farmer, having toiled through countless seasons, finally accumulating a small surplus of precious silver, perhaps an inheritance, or the fruit of an exceptionally good harvest. In a world without strong secular authorities or formalized banking systems, the dangers of keeping such wealth hidden in one's humble dwelling were ever present. Raids by bandits, the accidental oversight of a clumsy hand, or even the devastating quickness of a house fire could, in an instant, erase years of effort. But the temple, with its sturdy construction and its formidable spiritual defenses, offered a tangible haven. The farmer, with a quiet sense of relief, would approach the temple, perhaps making a small offering, and then, with solemn ceremony, entrust his silver to the care of the temple priests. He would leave with a lighter heart, knowing his cherished possessions were under the watchful eye of both man and spirit. This function of the temple was not merely a passive storage service. In many societies, the temple also played an active role in the redistribution of wealth, acting as a kind of ancient community chest. During times of famine or hardship, excess grains stored in temple granaries might be distributed to those in need, ensuring the survival of the community under the temple's benevolent authority. This charitable function further solidified the temple's position as a pillar of stability and trust, reinforcing its moral authority and encouraging individuals to contribute their surplus, knowing it would be wisely managed and used for the greater good, under divine sanction. The very architecture of these sacred spaces often reflected their role as secure repositories. Temples were frequently built with strong, thick walls of stone or brick, designed to withstand the ravages of time and the intrusions of man. Inner sanctums, often inaccessible to the common populace, might have contained specially constructed vaults or treasury rooms, their entrances discreet and their contents carefully guarded. These physical measures, combined with the invisible armor of sanctity, created places of extraordinary security, more robust and reliable than any private dwelling. The deliberate, slow construction of these structures, often spanning generations, imbued them with an enduring solidity that whispered of their permanence and reliability. So, as we reflect on the temple's multifaceted role, we begin to appreciate the intricate tapestry of trust, faith, and practical necessity that wove together to address the fundamental human need for the safekeeping of valuables. Before the advent of explicit financial institutions, the sacred authority of the temple offered a profound answer, a sanctuary not just for the soul, but also for the material treasures that supported life and allowed civilizations to flourish. The quiet reverence, the strong walls, the trusted hands of spiritual leaders, all converged to create a unique and vital system for saving money, even long before the concept of money as a standardized currency had fully taken shape. Our journey through these ancient practices continues to reveal the ingenuity and adaptability of human communities in shaping their world. Tonight, as we settle into a state of quiet repose, we shall continue our meandering journey into the past, exploring the ingenious ways in which ordinary people navigated the complexities of their financial lives long before the widespread advent of banks. We invite you to find your most comfortable position, perhaps dimming the lights, as we gently unfurl another chapter in this tranquil tale. Should you find a measure of peace in these whispered histories, a soft tap on the like or subscribe button would be a kind gesture, though no obligation rests upon your restful shoulders. As our narrative continues to unfurl its silken threads, we find ourselves drifting gently towards a period where communities, particularly those engaged in specialized crafts and trades, began to weave intricate tapestries of mutual support and shared responsibility. This was an era where the individual's destiny was often inextricably linked to the well-being of their collective, a sentiment which blossomed beautifully into the formation of what we have come to know as guilds and, in later iterations, cooperative societies. These were not merely places of commerce or craft, they were vibrant, living entities, offering a robust network of safety and solidarity for their members, providing a comforting embrace in times of vulnerability. Imagine, if you will, the bustling streets of a medieval town, perhaps the soft clang of a blacksmith's hammer echoing gently in the distance, or the rhythmic hum of a weaver's loom emanating from a sun-drenched workshop. In such a setting, the smith and the weaver, the baker and the tanner, each plied their skilled craft, dedicating their days to the meticulous creation of goods essential to daily life. Yet, beyond the crucible and the shuttle, beyond the kneaded dough and the cured hide, these individuals recognized a profound truth, that life, in its unpredictable ebb and flow, could present unforeseen challenges, moments when the steady hand of another was not merely helpful, but absolutely essential. It was from this deeply ingrained understanding of shared human frailty that the concept of guilds began to flourish, organic structures, carefully cultivated by the craftsmen and tradespeople themselves, designed not only to uphold standards of quality in their respective disciplines, but also, and perhaps more importantly, to construct a sturdy safety net for every one of their members. These were not institutions imposed from above, but rather self-organized communities, born from the practical needs and shared aspirations of those who toiled with their hands and their minds. Picture a craftsman, perhaps a master carpenter, whose hands, usually adept at shaping wood with precision and grace, suddenly become racked with fever. In an age devoid of state-sponsored social security or readily available bank loans, a prolonged illness could very easily spell utter ruin, not only for the carpenter but for his entire family. His workshop, once a beacon of productivity, might fall silent, his apprentices left idle, and the vital income cease to flow. It was in such precarious moments that the guild would step forward, a reassuring presence in the darkening shadows of uncertainty. The guild, through a system of regular contributions from its healthy and working members, would have amassed a communal fund. This fund, carefully managed by elected officials, was not merely a collection of coins, but a tangible expression of collective care. From this shared pool, the ailing carpenter would receive financial support, a steady stream of assistance to ensure that his family did not face destitution, and that he himself could convalesce without the added burden of financial despair. The goal was to sustain him through his period of incapacitation, allowing him the precious time needed for recovery, knowing that his place in the community, and indeed in his craft, remained secure. Similarly, these early forms of cooperative societies extended their compassionate embrace to their older members, those who, after decades of dedicated labor, found their strength waning, their hands perhaps no longer as nimble, their eyes no longer as keen. In a time when retirement pensions as we understand them were still a distant whisper, the prospect of old age could be fraught with anxiety. Guilds understood this deeply. They recognized the inherent value of their elders, not only for their invaluable experience and wisdom, but simply as cherished members of their community. Thus, arrangements were often put into place to provide for their respected older craftsmen and women. Funds might be allocated to ensure they had adequate housing, sustenance, and perhaps even a small stipend, allowing them to live out their declining years with a measure of dignity and comfort, rather than facing the bleak prospect of poverty or reliance on the fleeting charity of others. It was a societal compact, unspoken yet deeply understood. In youth and vigor, one contributed to the collective well-being, and in old age or infirmity, the collective would, in turn, provide for you. Beyond mere monetary support, these guilds fostered a profound sense of belonging and mutual responsibility. They were miniature welfare states, built from the ground up, sustained by the active participation and communal spirit of their members. The apprentice, knowing that his elders would be cared for, also understood that one day, he too would be reliant on this very system, reinforcing a cycle of generosity and support that spanned generations. Disagreements within the trade, disputes over quality or price, even personal conflicts, could often be mediated and resolved within the guild structure, maintaining harmony and stability within the community of craftsmen. These intricate systems of mutual aid were not simply about financial transactions, they were about the fundamental human need for security and connection. They represented a deeply empathetic approach to managing the inherent uncertainties of life, an understanding that human flourishing was best achieved not in isolation, but through interwoven networks of support. The individual coins contributed by each member transformed, through the alchemy of human connection, into a collective reservoir of resilience, ready to be drawn upon when the tides of fortune turned less favorably. And so, as we gently conclude this segment of our journey, we can reflect upon the sheer ingenuity and foresight of these ordinary people, who, without the sophisticated structures we take for granted today, managed to construct robust and enduring systems of financial and social security. Their legacy, woven into the very fabric of community, reminds us that long before banks solidified their place in society, the human heart, guided by empathy and practicality, often found the most profound and comforting ways to safeguard its own. Tonight, as the world outside softens into twilight, we'll gently drift back in time to an era when the landscape of finance was as varied and tangible as the fields and forests themselves. We'll explore the ingenious ways ordinary people, long before the familiar structures of banks or credit scores, managed the ebb and flow of their needs and desires. Take a slow, comforting breath, perhaps dimming the lights if you wish, and allow your thoughts to settle as we begin our quiet journey into the past. If, by the end of our tale, you find a gentle peace, a quiet joy in these long-forgotten whispers of history, then perhaps consider leaving a like or subscribing, allowing our shared journey to continue. Our last quiet stop brought us to the often communal, intricately woven fabric of mutual support and shared risks. Now, we turn our gaze to a more individual, yet equally pervasive, ancient financial practice, the act of pledging and collateral. Imagine a world where the intrinsic value of an object, large or small, could speak volumes, becoming a silent promise, a tangible guarantee in a transaction. This was the foundation upon which countless agreements were built, across continents and centuries, connecting one person's need with another's willingness to help, all anchored by something real, something that could be seen and touched and understood by all. The concept itself is elegantly simple, a straightforward exchange born of necessity and trust. When someone required resources, perhaps a few additional coins to mend a roof, or a supply of grain to see them through a lean season, or even the raw materials to craft a new tool, they would approach a trusted neighbor, a respected merchant, or perhaps a family member. It was not enough, in many instances, merely to voice a promise to repay. Human nature, with its inherent unpredictability, understood the gentle but firm need for a guarantee, a security against unforeseen circumstances or changes of heart. This guarantee often took the form of a pledge or collateral, an item of value that the borrower would temporarily surrender to the lender, holding it as a silent assurance until the debt was fully discharged. The variety of items deemed suitable for collateral was as diverse as life itself in those times. From the vibrant, living breath of animals to the steady thrum of crafted tools, from the potential bounty of future harvests to the enduring permanence of land itself, almost anything with recognized worth could serve this purpose. Consider, for a moment, the humble goat. In many agrarian societies, a goat was not merely a creature of fur and bleats, it was a living larder, a mobile milk factory, a source of leather and sustenance. To pledge a goat meant temporarily entrusting a vital asset, a small, walking piece of capital, to another. The lender, knowing the goat's inherent value and its capacity to sustain or reproduce, held it not just as a symbol, but as a potential recourse should the borrower fail to meet their obligation. The return of the goat, often fatter and healthier from its temporary care, would signal the successful completion of the agreement, a visible testament to trust fulfilled. Beyond livestock, the tools of daily life often found themselves serving as pledges. A carpenter's adze, a farmer's sturdy plow, a weaver's loom, these were not merely inanimate objects. They represented a person's livelihood, their skill, their very means of production. To pledge such an item was a serious undertaking, an act that demonstrated a profound need but also a firm intention to repay, for without these tools, one's ability to earn and make good on the debt would be severely compromised. The lender, therefore, understood the profound motivation behind such a pledge, knowing that the borrower would strive diligently to reclaim the very instruments of their trade. The temporary possession of a well-made chisel or a sturdy spade by a lender would be a silent, reassuring pact between two individuals, a testament to the essential machinery of work and living. The cycle of seasons, with its inherent promise of future bounty, also provided another crucial form of collateral, the share of a future harvest. For farmers, particularly, the lean months before the reaping of crops could be a time of acute need. Seeds had to be purchased, repairs made, and families sustained. In such instances, a farmer might pledge a portion, perhaps a tenth or a fifth, of their upcoming wheat, barley, or rice harvest. The lender would often be a merchant, an elder, or another prosperous farmer, someone with the capacity to wait for the season's yield. This arrangement required immense foresight and a deep understanding of agricultural cycles. The lender would be taking a calculated risk, dependent on favorable weather and a successful harvest. But for the farmer, it was a lifeline, allowing them to secure immediate necessities against the promise of future abundance. The eventual delivery of sacks of grain, fragrant and heavy with the earth's bounty, would be the physical manifestation of the debt repaid, a tangible completion of the agreement. As societies grew more complex, and as wealth began to concentrate in more enduring forms, even land itself became a powerful, almost unshakable, form of collateral. Consider the long, slow arc of human settlement, the deep connection to the earth that sustained communities for millennia. Land, whether fields for cultivation, plots for dwellings, or pastures for grazing, was the bedrock of existence. To pledge a piece of land, even temporarily, was an act of profound significance, often reserved for substantial sums or dire circumstances. Unlike a goat or a tool, land rarely disappeared, nor was its value prone to sudden, precipitous decline. It represented stability, rootedness, and a lasting legacy. The mechanisms for pledging land varied. In some cultures, a formal transfer of title, or a symbolic act of moving boundaries, might take place, with the understanding that the land would revert to its original owner once the debt was cleared. In others, particularly in medieval Europe, the concept of a mortgage, derived from Old French meaning dead pledge, emerged. Here, the land itself was the security, and the interest on the loan might be paid through the use of the land's produce or by the lender temporarily occupying and working the land. If the debt was not repaid, the pledge would become dead for the borrower, meaning permanent loss of the land. Such agreements were often recorded, sometimes even carved into stone or written on durable parchment, reflecting the gravity and permanence of the collateral. These ancient forms of pledging, whether a living animal, a vital tool, a portion of future sustenance, or the very earth beneath one's feet, all spoke to a deep human understanding of value and obligation. They were not abstract figures on a ledger but tangible, touchable things, each imbued with meaning and consequence. The act of offering collateral was often a moment of vulnerability, yet it was also a testament to ingenuity and resilience, a clear demonstration of how communities navigated economic challenges long before the advent of modern financial institutions. It connected individuals through trust, need, and the shared understanding of the worth of things, weaving a subtle, yet robust, financial safety net from the very fabric of daily life. This quiet system, with its roots deep in practicality and mutual respect, gently underscored the enduring human spirit of collaboration and self-reliance, a silent testament to an era where every possession held not just personal value, but also the potential to become a promise. Tonight, as we settle into the gentle quiet of the evening, perhaps with a warm, comforting drink beside us, and the soft glow of a dimmed light, we drift back to a time long past. A time when the rhythm of life was different, and the simple act of keeping one's valuable possessions safe required ingenuity and a careful, watchful eye. We explore the whispers of history surrounding how ordinary people, before the advent of formal banks, protected their hard-earned wealth. If tonight's journey into the past brings you a sense of calm and a peaceful drift towards sleep, a gentle thought to like or subscribe would be most appreciated, allowing us to continue these quiet explorations together. Our path tonight leads us deeper into the practicalities of safeguarding, a journey into the era before institutional security offered its reassuring embrace. We understand that even with the most meticulous planning, even with the most careful and creative solutions, the threat of loss, particularly loss through theft, was an ever-present shadow in the lives of those who held their wealth outside the walls of a formal institution. This was an inescapable truth of daily existence, a constant current beneath the surface of seemingly peaceful village lives and bustling market towns. Imagine, if you will, the small farmer in medieval England, his harvest successfully brought in, a portion sold at the local fair. Perhaps he holds a few silver coins, or a quantity of grain, or even a precious piece of woven cloth, representing his year's effort. These were not mere commodities, they were the very fabric of his survival, the guarantee against hunger, the hope for the future. The simple wooden chest under his bed, while offering a semblance of privacy, provided little true protection against a determined intruder. The careful burying of coins beneath a hearthstone, while ingenious in its secrecy, could not withstand a sustained search, nor did it guard against the erosion of time or the dampness of the earth itself. This omnipresent concern, this silent anxiety regarding the vulnerability of one's possessions, spurred a continuous evolution in the methods and physical structures designed for protection. It was a gradual process, born not from grand innovation, but from necessity and the quiet wisdom of lived experience. People, through trial and error, through the sharing of knowledge within their communities, constantly sought to enhance the security of their stored wealth. The simple wooden box began to incorporate enhancements. Imagine the introduction of sturdy iron bands, painstakingly fitted and riveted, reinforcing the corners and seams of a chest. These bands, often wrought by the local blacksmith, offered a formidable deterrent, making it far more difficult for a thief to pry open or smash the container. Then came the development of more sophisticated locking mechanisms. Early locks, while rudimentary by modern standards, were marvels of their time. They often involved complex internal workings of springs and levers, designed to frustrate and delay. A finely crafted lock, with its individual key, became a symbol of security, a small reassurance against the encroaching uncertainty of the external world. These locks were not easily picked, they often required significant time and skill, commodities a thief rarely had in abundance. The act of turning a heavy, intricately fashioned key in such a lock became a ritual, a tangible act of securing one's precious belongings. Beyond the enhancements to individual containers, there began to emerge more robust, larger-scale locations dedicated to safeguarding. In communities, particularly those with a growing merchant class or aristocratic presence, the concept of a shared secure space started to take root. Think of the strong rooms found within castles or fortified manor houses. These were not merely rooms, they were deliberately constructed fortresses within a fortress. Their walls were often extraordinarily thick, sometimes several feet of solid stone, designed to resist siege engines as much as they were to repel petty thieves. The doors were massive, crafted from heavy timber, often reinforced with multiple layers of iron plating, and secured by multiple, elaborate locks, sometimes even requiring 2 or 3 different keys held by different individuals to open. These guarded locations were not only physically imposing but also benefited from continuous human vigilance. Within a castle, for instance, there would be a constant presence of guards, sentinels whose duty it was to observe and protect. Their rounds, their watchful eyes, and the very structure of their daily patrols added a layer of human security that no mere lock or chest could ever provide. The fear of being discovered, of facing an alerted guard, was often a more potent deterrent than any physical barrier. In towns and cities, other forms of guarded locations began to emerge. Perhaps a prominent merchant, with extensive warehouses or a well-staffed residence, might offer to safeguard the valuables of his less fortunate or less well-protected neighbors, for a fee or as a gesture of community standing. These would be stored in a dedicated, secure area within his property, often under the watchful eye of his own retinue or trusted employees. These informal arrangements, built on trust and reputation, were the embryonic forms of what would later become official banking establishments. The expectation was that these strong places, with their thick walls and vigilant keepers, offered a level of security far superior to any individual's isolated efforts. Consider also the role of religious institutions. Monasteries and churches, particularly in the early medieval period, were often the most robust and secure buildings in a region. They were seen as sacred spaces, and their sanctity often afforded them a degree of protection, even from raiding parties. As such, they frequently became trusted repositories for valuable documents, precious metals, and other forms of wealth, not only for the community but also for local nobility. The monastic scriptorium, for example, often had a separate, heavily barred and locked room for the safekeeping of invaluable manuscripts and the community's treasures. The perceived divine protection, combined with the physical strength of the building and the continuous presence of monks and clergy, created an environment of considerable security. So, while the individual diligently secured their small hoard within their humble home, the constant threat of theft propelled communities and individuals to envision and create more collective, more robust solutions. These solutions, from the reinforced chest to the fortified strong room and the guarded monastery, represent a gradual, yet profound, evolution in the human effort to protect what was valuable. It was a testament to ingenuity, collaboration, and the enduring human desire for security, a wish that continues to echo through the corridors of time. As we reflect on these efforts, we can appreciate the simple yet profound comfort of modern security, built upon the silent struggles and clever adaptations of those who came before us. Tonight, as the world outside settles into its own quiet rhythm, let us gently drift back through the echoes of time, easing ourselves into a comfortable space, perhaps dimming the lights, and simply allowing these words to cradle us as we explore how the thread of financial memory was spun long before the grand halls of banks ever graced our landscapes. Should these calming meanderings provide a soft landing for your thoughts tonight, a gentle like or a quiet subscription would be a most welcome whisper of appreciation. Our journey tonight leads us not into bustling markets or grand pronouncements, but into the quiet corners of human ingenuity, observing how the very concept of keeping track, of holding on to the memory of a debt or a promise, slowly, almost imperceptibly, took shape. Before the intricate ledgers and digital records of today, the assurance of an agreement, the certainty of a debt, was often as ephemeral as a spoken word, a breath on the wind. Yet, the human need for order, for clarity in exchange, began to sculpt methods of remembering, ways to make these agreements more tangible, more enduring than a fading memory. Imagine, if you will, the earliest attempts to immortalize a simple transaction, perhaps the loan of a handful of grain, or the promise of labor in exchange for a tool. The very first records were often profoundly simple, born of the earth itself, or found in the natural materials that surrounded early communities. One of the most intuitive and widespread methods involved the humble stick, not just any stick, but one carefully chosen, smoothed by the hand, and then marked. These were the tally sticks, silent witnesses to countless ancient agreements. A notch carefully carved into the wood might represent a unit of grain, a head of livestock, or a day of work. If a loan was made, the stick would often be split in two, lengthwise. The lender would keep one half, the borrower the other. The notches on each half would perfectly align, a unique and unforgeable key. This ingenious system served as a physical contract, a shared memory made solid. Should there be a dispute, the two halves would be brought together, and the perfect marriage of their contours and their corresponding notches would settle the matter with quiet authority. It was a profoundly elegant solution, rooted in trust and physical evidence, understood by all, requiring no literacy, only a keen eye and a steady hand. These sticks documented not only debts owed but also taxes paid, contributions made to the community, and even records of property shared or transferred. They were the silent storytellers of countless small economies, binding people together through shared marks and shared understanding. As human societies grew more complex, as trade routes expanded beyond the immediate village, and as surpluses of grain and goods became more common, the need for more sophisticated, more expansive forms of record-keeping slowly emerged. The soft, pliant earth itself, transformed by the hands of early scribes, offered the next great leap in this silent revolution. In the sun-drenched lands of Mesopotamia, where agriculture flourished and cities began to rise, the practical utility of clay became profoundly evident. Picture, if you will, a scribe, perhaps in a storeroom filled with jars of oil and sacks of barley, pressing a stylus, a simple reed or a shaped piece of wood, into a small, damp slab of clay. On these clay tablets, merchants and temple administrators began to meticulously record transactions, not just as simple tallies, but with symbols that represented specific goods, quantities, and even the names of individuals involved. These were the very first accounts, the earliest systematic ledgers of debt and credit. The earliest forms were often remarkably direct, simple pictograms, a crude drawing of a sheep to indicate livestock, a sheaf of wheat for grain. But over time, these symbols evolved into more abstract forms, the wedge-shaped marks of cuneiform, which could capture not just objects, but also complex ideas, numbers, and the very flow of economic life. These clay tablets served as more than just private notes, they were public records, often stored in temples or administrative centers, providing a foundational layer of accountability and transparency for the nascent economies of these ancient cities. They documented every aspect of economic life, from the wages paid to laborers to the tribute collected from conquered lands, from the distribution of rations to the sale of vast quantities of commodities. Each tablet, once inscribed, would often be left to dry in the sun or, for more permanent records, baked in a kiln, hardening into an almost indestructible testament to an agreement, a payment, or an inventory. Imagine the quiet rustle of these baked clay tablets, carefully stacked in an ancient archive, each one a silent story of trade, of labor, of resources managed. They minimize disputes not by eliminating disagreement but by providing an unassailable record, a concrete artifact that could be referenced, reread, and understood by all parties involved. If a farmer claimed he had delivered 20 sacks of grain to the temple storehouse, and the temple administrator believed it was only 15, the clay tablet, scrupulously maintained, would offer its silent, unblinking truth. These records brought a new layer of stability and trust to economic interactions, moving beyond personal recall and introducing a verifiable, external memory. The evolution from a split stick to an inscribed clay tablet marks a profound shift in human society's ability to manage its financial affairs. It speaks to a growing foresight, an understanding that memory is fallible, but a shared, physical record can bridge gaps in time and perception. These early forms of accounting, though rudimentary by today's standards, laid the essential groundwork for every subsequent financial system. They taught humans the fundamental importance of documenting, of quantifying, and of creating an enduring testament to economic relationships. They transformed fleeting interactions into enduring facts, slowly but surely paving the way for the intricate financial structures that would one day emerge, built on the bedrock of these quiet, unassuming acts of record-keeping. And with that gentle thought, we may find ourselves drifting effortlessly into a peaceful slumber, the ancient world's wisdom softly cradling our own night. And so, our tranquil journey through the quiet corridors of time brings us gently to this penultimate chapter, where we begin to discern the faint, shimmering outlines of a world yet to come. Tonight, as the gentle rhythm of my words washes over you, allow your mind to unfurl and absorb the subtle transitions that paved the way for the financial landscapes we know today. We have wandered through vast expanses, observing countless ingenuity, countless quiet adaptations, as communities and individuals sought to navigate the intricate currents of economic life without the formal edifices of banks. Each story, each ingenious method we have explored, served not merely as a temporary solution, but as a subtle cultivation. Each act of storing grain, each meticulous record on a clay tablet, each communal fund for mutual aid, was in its own way a tiny seed planted in the fertile earth of human necessity. And now, as the dawn of more structured financial systems begins to paint the horizon, we can look back and appreciate how these seemingly disparate practices coalesced, forming the very bedrock upon which modernity would eventually be built. Consider, if you will, the informal lending networks we have discussed, the neighbor helping a neighbor, a family member extending a loan of seeds or tools. These were not merely acts of generosity, though much kindness certainly infused them. They were, in essence, the primal stirrings of credit systems. The very trust that undergirded these small exchanges, the implicit understanding of repayment, however flexible, laid the psychological and social groundwork for more complex lending. Over time, as communities grew and transactions became more frequent, the need for a more standardized approach to assessing creditworthiness, to understanding risk, and to ensuring repayment, would naturally arise. It was a gradual evolution, much like a meandering river slowly carving its path through the landscape, gaining momentum and definition with each passing season. The quiet promise between two individuals, whispered under a starlit sky, would one day find its echo in the meticulously drafted contracts of a financial institution. Then there were the various methods of secure storage, the careful stashing of valuables that we have so patiently examined. From the hidden caches in ancestral homes to the fortified strongrooms of temples and palaces, the impulse was always toward safekeeping, toward protecting hard-earned wealth from the vagaries of theft or disaster. These weren't just personal safeguards, they were, in a nuanced sense, nascent forms of deposit banking. The temple priests, guarding the community's precious metals, were, however inadvertently, performing a function akin to a modern vault. The individuals who entrusted their treasures to a respected merchant, perhaps for a small fee or on the strength of a long-standing relationship, were essentially making a deposit. This practice, repeated countless times across myriad cultures, cultivated a fundamental understanding that a neutral, trustworthy third party could safeguard one's assets more effectively than individual means alone. The very concept of entrusting one's wealth to an entity for safekeeping, expecting its return when needed, is the fundamental principle upon which all deposit-taking institutions are founded. It is a slow, quiet unfolding, a subtle shift in human behavior that, over millennia, reshaped the very architecture of economic exchange. And let us not forget the meticulous record-keeping, the quiet, painstaking efforts to track debts and credits, inventories and balances. Whether etched into clay tablets, inscribed on papyrus, or carefully noted in ledgers of parchment, these acts were far more than simple administration. They were the very origins of accounting, the silent, invisible infrastructure that makes any complex financial system possible. Before formal banks could even conceive of managing ledgers on a grand scale, generations of merchants, scribes, and community leaders had already refined the art of financial annotation. These individual acts of meticulous documentation, born out of a simple need to remember and to ensure fairness, gradually paved the way for the elaborate double-entry systems that underpin all modern finance. The quiet scratching of a stylus on clay, the deliberate stroke of a quill on paper, these were the early vibrations of a sophisticated system designed to bring order, transparency, and accountability to financial dealings. From the shared granaries of ancient villages, subtly demonstrating the benefits of pooled resources, to the caravans carrying precious goods, requiring complex systems of payment and deferred settlement, each instance we have observed contributed its own unique thread to the tapestry of future finance. The very notion of a shared risk, a collective responsibility, as seen in early forms of insurance or mutual aid societies, began to demonstrate the power of aggregation. By combining resources, individuals could achieve a level of security and opportunity that was simply unattainable when operating in isolation. This insight, nurtured over centuries of informal cooperation, would eventually find its formal expression in institutions designed to manage large pools of capital and distribute risk. The challenges and solutions we've meticulously examined were not isolated phenomena. They were, rather, interconnected strands, each influencing the other, gradually weaving a stronger and more intricate fabric of economic interaction. The need for capital, the desire for security, the imperative of fair exchange, these timeless human aspirations drove the innovation we've witnessed. And in addressing these needs, albeit through informal and often localized means, our ancestors unwittingly created the very foundations upon which the grand edifices of modern banking would eventually rise. It was a slow, organic growth, like the development of a mighty oak from a tiny acorn. There was no single moment of invention, no grand decree that brought banks into being. Instead, it was the cumulative effect of countless small, practical responses to everyday economic exigencies. The trust built in local communities, the understanding of value, the recognition of risk, the nascent systems of credit and deposit, these were the elemental forces at play. These diverse practices, born of necessity and shaped by ingenuity, laid the profound and enduring groundwork, not with a sudden leap, but with a gentle, persistent evolution, guiding humanity toward the more formalized financial systems that would, in time, become an indispensable part of our shared human story. And as these whispers of the past gently fade, preparing us for our final reflections, you may allow yourself to sink a little deeper, drifting into a quiet repose, the subtle echoes of history comforting your mind. Tonight, as our journey through time draws to a close, we consider the timeless whisper of ages past, a soothing echo that reminds us of enduring wisdom. We have, in these quiet moments together, explored a landscape where money, as we know it, was not the compass of every daily decision, and where the silent hum of resourcefulness shaped lives in profound and deeply meaningful ways. Please, find your most comfortable position, dim the lights if you wish, and allow yourself to gently drift into these final reflections, letting the soft unfolding of words guide you deeper into repose. If you have enjoyed this meandering journey through history, a quiet like or subscribe would be a gentle acknowledgement. We have wandered through sun-drenched fields of ancient Mesopotamia, observing families carefully setting aside grains in earthenware jars, their hopes for future harvests nestled securely within the clay. We have seen the patient hands in Roman households, tending to small, shared coffers, where coins accumulated not just for personal gain, but for the communal well-being of the family and even the wider village. These were not grand financial institutions, but rather intimate, deeply personal systems, woven into the very fabric of daily life. The fundamental principles that guided these ancient savers, these ordinary people facing the quiet uncertainties of their world, possess a remarkable resilience, a steady light that continues to glow warmly even in our complex modern financial landscape. The first, and perhaps most profoundly simple, was the understanding of the future. It was a future not always distant or abstract, but often as proximate as the next season, the next harvest, the next birth, or the next unexpected illness. Savings were not merely a cold arithmetic calculation, but a warm embrace of foresight, a gentle preparation for what tomorrow might bring, allowing for a steadier, more predictable rhythm of life. Consider the meticulousness with which agricultural societies managed their surplus. It was an act of faith, in a way, as much as it was practical planning. A portion of the bounty, carefully set aside, represented a buffer against famine, a seed for the next planting, or a means to acquire tools or livestock. This was the rudimentary form of capital accumulation, born not in a boardroom, but in the humble granary, the quiet root cellar. It taught patience, the understanding that immediate gratification often yielded less stable long-term outcomes than thoughtful, measured restraint. Another enduring principle was the deep appreciation for intrinsic value. Before standardized currencies or complex financial instruments, wealth was often tangible: fertile land, healthy livestock, durable tools, precious metals, or even simply a bountiful store of preserved foods. This tangible nature of wealth fostered a deeply ingrained understanding of its true worth, the effort required to produce it, and the careful stewardship needed to maintain it. It was not an abstract number on a ledger, but something you could touch, feel, nurture, and depend upon. This connection to the inherent value of resources encouraged prudent management, discouraging frivolous expenditure in favor of thoughtful preservation and investment. The concept of community and reciprocity also played a deeply significant role in the pre-banking world, a principle that, perhaps, we find ourselves yearning for in our often individualistic modern sphere. The Susus of West Africa, the tontines of other cultures, the simple sharing amongst neighbors during times of scarcity, these were not merely acts of charity, but sophisticated, unwritten contracts of mutual support. They understood that collective strength often surpassed individual fortitude. The act of contributing to a shared pool, knowing that help would be there when needed, fostered a sense of belonging and collective responsibility that smoothed the sharp edges of individual financial vulnerability. It was saving, but imbued with human connection, built on trust and shared destiny. Furthermore, these ancient practices instilled a deep sense of discipline and routine. The regular setting aside of a portion of one's resources, whether it was grain after a harvest, a few coins from a market transaction, or labor contributed to a communal project, was a habit diligently cultivated. It was not always easy, nor was it always comfortable, but it was understood as necessary for survival and prosperity. This discipline, repeated over generations, became ingrained, a quiet, almost meditative rhythm of resource management that transcended individual personalities and cultural variations. Even the humble act of bartering, which we touched upon in earlier chapters, embodied a form of value exchange and resource allocation. It required a keen understanding of needs, an awareness of surplus, and the ability to negotiate fairly. It fostered ingenuity in finding satisfactory trades and encouraged the cultivation of diverse skills or goods, so as to always have something of value to offer. It was, in essence, a dynamic, decentralized marketplace driven by direct human interaction and immediate need. As we gently transition back to our own time, we can observe how these quiet, ancient principles continue to resonate, albeit often in subtly transformed guises, within our contemporary financial landscape. The modern notion of an emergency fund, for instance, is a direct descendant of the ancient granary, a buffer against unforeseen difficulties. Retirement planning, a long-term allocation of resources for a future phase of life, echoes the farmer's patient setting aside of seeds for future harvests. Investment, in its broadest sense, is still about identifying and nurturing intrinsic value, whether in stocks, property, or intellectual capital, hoping for growth over time. And even our often complex banking systems, with their accounts and loans, are built upon the fundamental human need to safeguard resources and facilitate their movement for collective and individual progress. The enduring lesson from these ordinary people, saving quietly before the advent of banks, is not about the specific methods or tools, but about the fundamental human wisdom they embodied. It is the wisdom of foresight, of understanding intrinsic value, of the power of community, and the quiet strength of discipline. These are not merely historical curiosities, they are foundational truths, as relevant today as they were in the sun-drenched fields of antiquity, or amidst the quiet hearths of our earliest villages. So, as the echoes of these ancient practices gently fade into the present, we are left with a comforting sense of continuity. The human spirit, in its quiet quest for security and provision, has always found ingenious and deeply human ways to manage its resources, charting a path forward, one careful step at a time. May these timeless principles offer you a renewed sense of peace and perspective, settling softly upon your thoughts as you drift even deeper into a restful sleep. The journey through time is complete, and the quiet wisdom of the past now melds with the stillness of the present moment. Good night, and sleep very, very deeply.